some more.
Yo, what is good, people? Izzy Max here, back again with some more MDL content. This is going to be a little different. I debated whether or not to do this, but I decided, why not? So this is going to be kind of going through what is still available in the transactions. These are going to be mons. I picked one of every type that I think is probably the best of that type, and what would actually be used if picked up. So we are going to go through every type, kind of go through some pros, cons. I'll have its stats and stuff on the screen, and hopefully this will just help the coaches if they need a type on their team, or they're just trying to find some coverage, or just a good mon overall. So without further ado, let's get into it. And so first up, we do have Dragon. Probably the best dragon on the list is going to be Hydreigon. It was just dropped last week. With respectable stats in every department, the pros of this mon is it's a ground immunity. You can run it physical or special. Granted, it is usually ran special. It does have a wide move pool, and it is a decently good speed stat at 98. You can scarf it, or you can just kind of maneuver the speeds to either be slower or faster than whatever you need. Cons of this mon is, again, its wide move pool. It has really bad 4 move slot syndrome, which means you really can't fit everything you want on it. So for that is going to be a con, and also a 4x Fairy Week is never good. But overall, really solid mon. Next up, we have Ghosts. So there's actually not a lot of available Ghosts, but I do have Dust Noir on here as my personal pick for being the best Ghost still available. HP is kind of low, respectable HP, really good defense and special defense, and really slow speed. It's a Trick Room mon. It also sets it. Some of its pros, of course, is it's super bulky. It's really good attack. It does have a decent move pool. It's also a setter and abuser of Trick Room, but its cons is it's just not Dusclops. It's not as reliable, just not as good. So that's kind of why I'm guessing it's still available, but it's still a really good ghost type. Next up is Rock. There's actually not a lot of rock types, period, and the good ones, of course, are picked up. So for this pick, I actually picked Stonejourner. This is a really weird mon. As you see, its stats are decent, other than the glaring weakness, which is, of course, its only true con is its 20 special defense, which is abysmal. You shoot this thing with a water gun and it's dead. You toss a leaf at it, it's dead. The ground even shakes a little bit. Magnitude 1, it's dead. Or magnitude 1, if it was special, of course. This thing does not take special hits. Pros are actually Power Spot. It hasn't really worked in VGC, like the actual season, but I feel like it could work in this setting, since it is a draft league. Defense stat's really good, and its attack stat is also really good. I don't know who would use this, because I think most teams have a decent rock type, or good enough spread where they don't need a rock type, but Stonejourner is still there if anybody wants it. Next up is Torkoal. Surprisingly, this thing did not get drafted. There is only one coach, though, running Sun. So, I mean, it's technically the premier setter, but when you can draft Ninetales and you get both, this is kind of... Ninetales is kind of better. Some of the pros of Torkoal is, of course, it's a Sun setter. Its defense stat is huge. It is one of the slower mons under Trick Room. It might be actually the slowest. And it does have Will-O-Wisp and Yawn if you do want to run a supportive set. I didn't put it on here, but it does get access to Body Press. Cons, its special attack stat isn't actually that good, and it needs Trick Room. If there's not Trick Room, or it's not doing its job just as a Sunsetter, it's not really doing anything useful for your team. Next up is Water, and I have Araquanid. I debated something, but it'll come in the later slides. But you can see the stats there. The pros to Araquanid is the Water Bubble ability, boosting its water moves and lowering the fire moves thrown against it, even though it is neutral. Also, you cannot get burned. Another pro is its defensive stats. Defense at 92 is really good. Special defense at 132 is amazing. Its cons, if you're not hitting with a water move, you're actually not doing a lot of damage. It only has a 70 attack stat, and it doesn't have a wide move pool anyway. So you're kind of limited in what it does. In singles, of course, this thing runs sticky webs, but that's not really used in VGC. So with that, I do think it's the best water type, bulky waters. For the fairy type, it's actually Gardevoir. In the VGC season, not a lot of people, I guess, gravitate towards Gardevoir because there are things that do its job just better. Its stats aren't bad. The pros are it's very versatile. It could be ran supportive, it could be ran offensive, trick room setter, status, passer, just a whole bunch of things. It is a trick room setter and blocker because it does get in prison. And it can be very offensive. I mean, 125 is nothing to scoff at. The cons, it's physically frail. Doesn't have a lot of defense or HP, and is very predictable. If you're running a trick room team and you see a Gardevoir, you know it's probably there to stop it. If you're not running a trick room team and you have really solid answers to Gardevoir, you probably know it's there to support whatever else. If you don't have answers to it, of course you know it's probably super offensive. But nevertheless, I do think Gardevoir could be really good in a draft league setting. So be on the lookout for that. On these psychic types, we do have Musharna. So Musharna actually doesn't get talked about a lot for a trick room setter. It is on the same speed tier as Hatterene, but the pros here are the telepathy. You do not get hit by your allies' moves, which is really big. It is a bulky trick room setter. As you see, we do have a 116 HP stat, 85 in defense, and 95 in special defense, so it can reliably, for the most part, set your trick room for you. It is very slow, of course, and then it can be supportive or it can be offensive. I do think it gets like Yawn. I think it gets Ally Switch. It just gets a good handful of support moves. On the cons, though, if you are wanting to run a trick room sweeper, it doesn't get a lot of coverage moves. I think it gets like Fairy, Ghost, Magical Leaf, Mystic Fire, and Psychic. I don't really think there's a lot of coverage moves, but you could definitely make Musharna work, and if you're looking for a trick room setter, I do believe Musharna can do the job. For the fighting types, this was going to be Virizion, but it actually just got picked up, so we are shifting to Lucario. Pros are its abilities. It cannot be, I believe, flinched, and then it also has Justified. Another pro is its move pool, physical and special. Special move pool is kind of a little more lackluster, even though it is 5 more in a stat, not really going to matter too much, but it does have a very wide move pool. Cons, it is really frail. 70s and the defensive is not great, and it also kind of just wants to be a little faster. I feel like 95 would have been a good stat for it, but 90 overall just isn't cutting it. For the flying type, we actually have Butterfree. I know a couple coaches were looking at it here in the most recent transaction day, but the pros are its ability, compound eyes, and tinted lens. Of course, you do get, I think it's like 98.7% accurate sleep powders, which is super huge. And then some of the other pros that are basically just for making this mon good is, of course, the accurate sleep powders, Tailwind, and Rage powder. Some of the cons here are it's really frail, 60, 50, 80, not cutting it. It's really slow. And another one is it's not very offensive. It's very one-dimensional. Although you can run G-Max, but it's probably like a second or third option. Next up for the normal, I do have Obstagoon. This is actually something I was looking at personally. But some of the pros are its abilities. Defiant, really good. Reckless, really decent. What's the other one? Defiant, Reckless, and Guts. Another really good ability. And then its attack power. Of course, if you're running Guts, Defiant, or Reckless, you are boosting your attacks. You are going to cater your set around that. 90 doesn't look that special, but when you're catering for the boosts, it is going to be very, very good. The cons is a 4 times weakness to fighting. Of course, in a draft league, I don't think that's that huge. Not everybody has a really good fighting type with Mach Punch or Vacuum Wave. And then the cons, another one, it's kind of one-dimensional. It's going to be an attacker. Although it does have decent bulk at 93, 101, 81, you just kind of have to work around it. Next up, sorry for the low-res image, but is the ground type. Not a lot of good grounds out there left. Everybody kind of took what they needed on the ground side, but we do have Flygon. Flygon overall is a jack of all trades. Of course, that is going to be its pro, but it's also going to be its con on the same side. It does not really exceed at anything, but it is overall just a solid mon. You know what you're going to get out of it every week, and if you're still looking for a ground type or a dragon or both, this is going to be a good mon for you, and I think it could really do some work. Ice types, there's not a lot of them. Not very good ones anyway. So I picked Ice Q. I think it could be really good in a draft league setting. Of course, its stats aren't all that impressive, but it does get access to Belly Drum, and one of its pros is Ice Face, of course, being immune to the first physical attack it takes. But one of the big glaring cons is it really needs redirection to work. And without that redirection, it just doesn't really do anything. Coming up next is the Grass type. I do expect Serena to go this week. But as you see, its stats are very solid. Of course, special attack, not very good, but you're not going to be using it. 72, 98, 98 in defenses is really good. And then the 120 attack stat is fantastic. Some of the pros is Queenly Majesty, of course, blocking all priority moves. And its attack stat is really good. But the cons, of course, is it's kind of predictable. You're not really going to be using this as a support mon. It's coming for offensive power. And I didn't put it on here, but its speed stat is kind of in a weird spot. At 72, it's just not wonderful, but overall, this is a really good mon. Next up, we do have the Steel type, and I did pick Bronzong. Surprisingly, this thing is not drafted. I probably will pick this over Musharna, but this was the best Steel type, so I did end up putting Musharna on the Psychic page. But this is another really, really good Trick Room setter. Pros are Levitate. I didn't put Heat Proof, but it could be a pro if you're not expecting ground moves. It is a really good Trick Room setter, and it also has access to a lot of support moves, some of which are Ally Switch, weak Bulldozes if you want to proc some weakness policies. But the cons is this thing is not very offensive. If you need something to sweep under Trick Room, this is not where you're going to find it. Unless you're running a super setup set with Iron Defense and Body Press, you're not going to get a lot of offensive power out of Bronzong. Next up is Drapion. This was going to be in the dark spot until I realized Obstagoon was still there. And there's not really a lot of really good poisons. So Drapion's going to fit this spot here. This is a fast taunter. If you do need something with taunt, maybe for the redirections or just the status spreading of some mons. And you could also run a crit set. So that could be very valuable. If you're missing your KOs and you need something to do just a little bit more damage, 90 is kind of respectable for an attack stat. Also, something I didn't put on here was it's got a really good defense stat and a decent speed. So you could take advantage of that. Cons are it's missing a lot of strong coverage moves. If you want to run coverage, you're either going to have to just not do it or give up a lot of accuracy and power to do so. So it's not really what you need. And this is, again, a very predictable mon. Of course, you can run taunt. Toxic Spike's not really used in VGC, but outside of taunt, it's not really doing anything else other than being offensive, and 90 isn't the most terrifying for an offensive sweeper. Next up, the mon I was going to put in the water slot, we have Galissapod here. Pros, it's very strong. I did put strong on purpose. And priority. These kind of fall hand in hand. It gets a lot of priority moves. Sucker Punch, First Impression, Aqua Jet. It doesn't get Fake Out. It might get Faint, I don't know. But it's a decent mon. It has really, really good attack at 125, really good defense at 140, and then decent in the other defenses at 75 and 90. Speed stat is, of course, super, super slow, but with all that priority, who cares? Cons is Emergency Exit, and I have an asterisk by it because that's also kind of a pro for this mon. You hit something with a move, and then they hit you back, and you get emergency exited out. Well, that's momentum for you. You can get in what you need, if you have it, of course, and continue to put on offensive power, and then this thing will just come back out later. But kind of a con, kind of a pro. Next up, we have the Dark type, and this is Braviary, or Mandibuzz. Of course, there have been 3, I think, Dark types on this list. But Mandibuzz, super defensive. Some of its pros are the overcoat ability, so it is not going to be put to sleep or take damage from weathers. It is super bulky at 110, 105, 95. Has access to Snarl, Tailwind, Taunt, and Fake Tears. But that's about it. It does get, of course, like Brave Bird and Foul Play, but look at those attack stats. 65, 55, you're not really doing any damage. So you get what you get. It's going to be like a super supportive mon. And then lastly, on the electric page, we do have Rotom Heat. I wanted to put Morpeko here, but I couldn't. I know Rotom is way better than Morpeko. But the pros of this mon is, of course, it's Levitate. So its quad weakness to ground is not a thing. Unless, of course, you do have Mold Breaker. Another pro is it can be supportive. It does get access to Will-O-Wisp, Ally Switch, and other things like that. And it can also be a setup mon since it does now have access to Nasty Plot. Some of the cons, its move diversity is not great. It gets Ghost, Electric, one fire move that drops its special attack, and that's about it. It doesn't get much of anything else. And I've already said it, its stab fire move does drop its special attack, and you don't really have access to anything else. The lack of hidden powers actually, I think, hurt the Rotoms. But that's going to be all for this. That is the last typing. So kind of be on the lookout. These are some of the mons I expect to go if the coach needs this typing. Or, I guess, checking off one of the pros that I listed for some of these mons. So if you enjoyed, please do leave a like. And like I said, expect these to be added onto some teams after this week's over. So I will see you in the next one. Peace.